Today's episode of Behind the Business is all about branding your offer and making sure it fits your client avatar. So as always, pen and paper to hand. Here we go. Hi there and welcome to episode 20 of Behind the Business with myself, Steve Swift. And as always, I'm joined by my good friend, John Child. John, how are you keeping?
I'm good, thanks, Steve. Yeah, it's been an interesting weekend. As you know, we've discussed already. I succumbed to the hay fever, so it's been a weekend of nasal douching for me, which is about as exciting as it gets. And then yesterday was my birthday, so yes. Hence, we are recording this on an unusual day for us and an unusual time. But yes, it's been an interesting few days. How about yourself?
Yes, it's been one of very busy, to be fair. There's been lots of things that I've had to juggle around. So very hectic week ahead, which is always good. There's a bit of fun, a bit of downtime involved in that as well, which is always important to get that bit of a balance going on so you don't burn yourself out. But other than that, yeah, absolutely fine. Can't complain whatsoever. So, well, I'll tell you what I want to do, though. I want to just touch on, before we get into this week's episode, just recap briefly, if I may, John, about the last 2 weeks' episodes that we've done, because it fits nicely, as always, with what we're going to talk about today, which is about branding your offer and the importance of making sure it fits your client avatar, which everybody should have done because we covered that weeks ago. But the last few episodes, we've touched heavily on marketing, whether it's been organic marketing, your split testing and optimizing, having a marketing plan. And you went through this and gave people homework on the last 2 episodes. As I say, one was your marketing plan and the other one was how to build a marketing calendar. Now, there's templates already out there that we've put along with the show notes from previous episodes. So hopefully people will have gone through those exercises and done the homework to complete those tasks in preparation for today's episode. So I just wanted to put that out at the front, John, just so people knew. Is there anything you wanted to add just to reinforce and just to really push home the importance of what you covered during the marketing plan and marketing calendar episodes that we did before we jump into the branding one of today's episode?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to realize that particularly the last 2 episodes, they fit together very well. They build on that basis, as you say, the avatar. And what we're going to be talking about today, as I alluded to last week, is going to be a key aspect of putting what we talked about in the last couple of weeks into practice. So it's very important that if you haven't done the work from the last 2 weeks, or if you've got stuck or whatever and you need help, you reach out to either myself or Steve to get that help, because this is a real key thing. It's what we've been talking about and what we're going to talk about today from a sustainability point of view is extremely important. And when you think that the vast majority of new businesses who don't put those foundations in place, they're not there 2-3 years down the line. Our aim is to make sure you've got those tools in place so that you're sustainable across time, so that your business can be not only process driven, so that you know what you're doing and it takes the least amount of effort for you to get the maximum result, the 80-20 rule. But it's also important that what you're doing brings flexibility to your business. And the dichotomy, or not the dichotomy, the paradox here is, if you put these things in place that we've been talking about, I've just noticed my videos playing up a bit today, Steve, but never mind, we'll carry on. If you put those things in place, these are the building blocks that are going to allow you that flexibility and that ability to, key difference here is, if you're running a job, so if your business is a job, you're running day to day, right? And if you're running day to day, you're really on a roller coaster. And if you're on a roller coaster, you're saying, today's been a bad day, and sleepless nights. But if you're running a business, you understand that everything has its cycle, like we talked about, but way back in sort of episode 3, 4, something like that. You recognize those cycles and you can plan for them, and you can say, right, well, I know that something's coming up. I need to do something different with my marketing. Branding is the consistency that ties that flexible marketing together, so that even when you're being flexible and you're changing techniques and things like that, it's recognizable. Every few weeks, for a great example of this, every few weeks, Amazon or McDonald's in particular will do a completely different marketing campaign, but the branding is always the same. It's always the golden arches, it's always McDonald's red, and it's always the same slogan, but the campaign is completely different. And that's what we're talking about today. And I hope, Steve, that was as a quick example of what we're going to be talking about. Hopefully that fits with how you see it as well.
It came across just like that to me, John, as well. And I think that's what we need to make sure we really push home in today's episode for everybody here behind the business, is that the branding, it's like anything that we've mentioned before in business. The branding it's not necessarily fixed, but it has to still deliver the same message. So it's recognizable. That's what branding really is. It's recognizing who this is behind the products or the services, which those elements can change, they can pivot, but the branding itself is still going to be the same. So I remember I was driving down the M1 motorway the other day, and I noticed there was a vehicle going down, just a 7.5 ton vehicle going down the carriageways. I passed by, and I didn't really know what the company did. It had the big company name on it, but I didn't know what it did. And the sign writing, to be fair, wasn't brilliant. It was a very sunny day, and the colour of the vehicle and the colour of the text and the font style, it didn't pop. It didn't stand out. So it's hard to read it, certainly as you're driving by as well. So I found that a key thing in preparation for today's episode. Where branding, it's something that it builds. It doesn't just suddenly happen. Okay. And that's what some people get mixed up between advertising and marketing and brand awareness. And when you're doing advertising campaigns, the advertising and the brand awareness are two completely different approaches altogether. The language that you use, the positioning that you use, how you go about the structure of it all, it is such a different type of campaign when you're doing a brand awareness campaign to a product or a service campaign.
I think that's really. So I was just going to say, I think you've hit on something really key there, which is that you brought up brand awareness. And there's depending on the type of business that you're running, brand awareness is a real buzzword, and you'll see adverts for people who are saying, I'll teach you all about brand awareness. Well, brand awareness is basically you've got a branding that people recognize, but brand awareness is indirect advertising as far as sales. And if you're a startup business, it doesn't matter what your field is, what your projections are, or anything. If you're in a startup business, brand awareness does not exist. And you need to build an element of awareness by having consistency in your branding. And your branding includes things like your logo and those kind of things. The window icon that we now use on our podcast is part of our branding. The orange and grey color palette is part of our branding. You'll see that when Steve does things on his Instagram, he did something the other day to advertise the website. He's got his own branding on there, but it's also our branding is heavily featured on there. But that advert is not something that I would have built for my Instagram necessarily, because my client base is different, my audience is different, but we have cohesive branding for behind the business. Now, we could put out things all day in orange and grey with that window logo on and not tell people to visit the website, and nobody would visit the website. But they'd go, I've seen that before, and that's fair enough. But what we're talking about today is branding that will make your advertising consistent. Because you're not Coca-Cola, right? Coca-Cola are the masters at brand awareness. And that's great. But people buy Coca-Cola because Coca-Cola have got the budget for that. You need to be much more direct in your advertising than seeking for awareness as a whole. build it in, I think. I mean, again, this is just my opinion, and Steve may disagree with me. But my view is you've got to build that awareness in, but your awareness comes from, especially in the early stages, getting those testimonials, getting those reviews, and making sure that people feature or share your content if that's the way you want to go. But that content has to say something, which hopefully is, don't forget to visit us and buy our service. Yeah. Is that fair to say, do you think, Steve?
Yeah, and just to add a bit more to what you were saying there, John, with regards to when you're new or relatively new, and you aren't the Coca-Colas or the Nike or Nike, or I'm going to pronounce it, sort of thing of the world, you've got to come at it a different angle. And an approach which I've used with clients is do something that's memorable. I've mentioned pattern interrupt previously, and it's on a similar page to that. And it's all about grabbing someone's attention, but being memorable. If you can have something that's really catchy, but simple and easy, but it either annoys people, as daft as it sounds. There was an advert that used to run in the 80s, and it was a guy that used to scream at the telly selling carpets.
Mike's Carpets.
I didn't even have to say anything more. And John, you remembered, this is it. You see, now that is branding done very well, but on a tiny budget.
Yeah.
This guy wasn't a huge carpet, company at all. He had Denby Dale, Thorpe Arch, and Brigg. I even remember the towns that he was in because of the advertising that he'd used on the back of the branding he had created, or his marketing company, or the people that use for doing the marketing. Yes, he was on TV and he was on radio, but it was the tonality in his voice. It was his style appearance, or lack thereof, depending on what you think of him.
Do you know what, though, Steve? That you've hit on a really key point here, because he was the face of his brand.
He was, yeah.
And when you are, as you, and I would venture to suggest most of our listeners will be, an army of one. We've got advisors, we pull people in for different projects, but when you are effectively your business, you become your brand if you are the face of that brand. And you need to think about that. Now, you can already tell from watching 20 plus videos of us, we have different approaches. We speak in different ways because Steve works with people and teaches sales and that side of things. I'm a coach, so I'm much more head to one side, monotonous. I'll send you to sleep if it's just me talking. So, but that's deliberate because we have different client bases outside of this. And that's part of the lesson that hopefully people are subconsciously getting, is that my client avatar is not Steve's client avatar. And the behind the business client avatar is a subset of the two. So you need to take that on board, and that is part of your branding. So the first stage in branding your business is to know who your client is. The second stage is to know who you are and what you stand for. So the first stage in putting a brand together, and stop me if I'm jumping ahead here, Steve, is really to say, right, obviously you've got a product or a service, but what is your business going to stand for? Is it simply to sell widgets to companies that buy widgets? Is it to improve your community through generating income into your business and then putting a percentage back in your community, which is something that my business does? You need to think about these things, because these things are going to fuel how you put your message together. Because if your business is, for example, I used to work for GE. I think I might have mentioned this before. One of my first jobs, I'm a big proponent of the Six Sigma philosophy and the GE way of doing things. But their mission statement, as an example, really simple: profitably satisfy customers' needs. Now, that's one sentence, but that's a mission statement, and that's a powerful mission statement. Now, that drove them to just multiple hundreds of % of growth year on year. But what that does is that includes they're a profit making industry and they're all about satisfying the client need. But the key thing there is they put profit first and client second. If it's not profitable, they're not going to do it. If the client can kick and scream and ask for it, but if it's not profitable, they'll say, we can't do that. And that's an important part of when you're putting your mission statement and your value statement together, which I'll talk about in a second, because you need to know where your boundaries are. Because if you're going to do something the best that you can do and hopefully be able to market it as better than your competitors, which is, if your USP is we are the best at what we do, then that means you're going to be the best at one or two things. There's going to be other things that you're not so good at. Well, do you want to provide that service? And there's a great story in there's really popular book. Sorry, Steve, I feel like I'm taking over a bit here, but there's a great book which everyone will have heard of, and hopefully a lot of you will have read. It's called Raving Fans, and if I can find my copy of it, I'll tell you who it's by. There we are. It's by Ken Blanchard. I'll even show you the cover. Just Ken Blanchard and Spencer Johnson, and you can see it's a really thin book there, right? But there's this is what this book is about. It's about putting those borders in place. But there's a great story in there about a shop, and it's like a mom and pop supermarket, if you like. It's an American book, and they're talking about, where does your service end? And one thing that they chose not to offer was carrying your bags to your car. And if people used to say to them, can somebody help me out with my bags? They'd say, that's not what we do. But they do everything else fantastically well. Now, that is an example of, I'm using that example deliberately because I read that and went, oh, just take the bags to the car. I mean, to me, that's going the extra mile. But what I'm trying to demonstrate here is that when you decide where your barrier is for your service and for your mission, it's a solid wall. And this is why you need to be careful about what you decide is going to go in these statements. Because when you put an advert out, when you develop a marketing campaign, you're going to look at this and you're going to say, does it fit with my values? And if your values, if you get offered a joint venture, for example, and your value statement says it doesn't fit, then you should turn that joint venture down, regardless of the profitability, because you need integrity in your business. And that's from a psychological point of view, it's very, very important. Because if you don't adhere to the values that you set your business, and as we've just talked about, you are your business. If you're an army of one, you're being dishonest with yourself, you're being dishonest with your clients. And we mentioned ages and ages ago, we were talking about, if you make a mistake in public, correct it in public. And I mentioned Richard Branson and said, he's got this thing. One of his personal values is, if you make a mistake in public, correct it in public. And then he made a massive mistake and disappeared off to his island, and we didn't see him for 6 months. Well, anybody who noticed that went, oh, but his value set that he brands on and that the Virgin brand is supposed to stand for is you hold your hands up and you say you're sorry. And he didn't do that. Well, there's an awful lot of people like me, and I would suggest an awful lot of our listeners, because they're not stupid, who went, well, if he doesn't believe that, what else doesn't he believe? And that's the key point. You have to have integrity in the way that you brand your business and get these right. So once you've got your mission statement, you get your branding statement, and your branding, you get your value statement. And that is basically, what are the moral things and what are the key things, that the rules basically that I'm going to follow in fulfilling this mission and that my business will follow. And that's got an importance, a key importance for you when it's just your business. But it's also, as your business grows, that becomes important because you instill that in the people that you work with, and they don't compromise that because they're representing your business. So again, Steve, I kind of wasn't expecting to go down that route, and I think I jumped ahead a bit, but I kind of got on a roll there. So
yeah, absolutely. But there's key points that you've made there, John, that fit very nicely with this episode about branding your offer. You've touched on all the elements about, the value, the mission statement, and making sure it fits with your client avatar. And a couple of points that you mentioned there was referring back to the GA part that you mentioned about the profit and then customer satisfaction. And some people might say, yeah, but I want to make sure my customer's satisfied. But it's no good satisfying your customers if you're not making enough money to be sustainable in business. So, and that is probably why, I wasn't in the room obviously when GA came up with that mission statement, what they said, but it holds fast. And I've come across this so many times where I've worked with companies that are going, oh, we're working hard and we can't really take any more bookings, but we're struggling to grow one thing or another. And I've looked and I've just said, well, your prices are out. And they're going, yeah, but we're going to be competitive. No, you're not going to be competitive if you're out of business. Your prices aren't correct. And so having that mentality of it's got to be profitable for us to deliver a quality service to our customers so they are satisfied.
Yeah. And it's also about educating your potential clients. If you've got your avatar right, you've got a laser focused avatar, you know who your client base is, you know what their problem is, you know how they work. And we've talked already in previous episodes, and you covered it very, very succinctly about, if you've got that right, then your branding answers those objections before you get there, because you educate your client in, it's not about price, it's about whether it's going to last.
That's right, yeah. And so, just to put something to rest before people start screaming at the screen or, listening to it sort of thing, thinking, what's this idiot on about, saying, you've got to make it profitable and it's not about the price and one thing or the other. My customers only have so much disposable income, one thing or another, or it's a competitive market, you haven't got a clue. My first business that I set up personally was in probably the most saturated industries ever. And yet I still made over £4.65 million in sales. You can't do that unless you do things right. And like John says, you have to stay focused. Okay, so I made sure it was profitable, even though a lot of my clients, and I'm talking, I hope I don't get in trouble for saying this, obviously, when it goes out, but I had clients like John Lewis, Laura Ashley, Debenhams, Harrods, Tesco supermarket. These were my clients that I was delivering, bad English there. So it's this new microphone. I'm going to blame the new mic. And it was a case of they were trying to squeeze me, saying, look, we can't afford to pay a higher rate. I'm saying, well, look, warehouse costs have gone up, fuel costs have gone up, staff wages have gone up. There are increasing costs to me as a business owner. And in order for me to maintain my quality of service that my brand is about, I have to up my prices proportionally. I'll suck some of it up, but if it's going to be detrimental to me being able to deliver a service and be in business to serve you, then I'm going to say, look, this is where we need to be. And now if you can get someone to do it cheaper, that's fine. I have to shake your hand and thank you for your business so far, but I can't continue on those terms.
Yeah. When you
and the amount
me
of
in a year
people
because
that
they
I
screwed it
spoke,
up.
exactly. So you either get the phone call because that company's now gone bust because they're doing it too cheap and they couldn't afford to run the vehicles anymore or pay the staff, and their customers, not the delivery company, but the retailers that were reliant on the logistics side, which was outsourced, if that falls short of the mark and doesn't meet expectations to have their customers satisfied, to flip the second half of the GA statement, is because that company is basically, they're trying to get something for as little as they can. Now, obviously, that's their job. The FD of a company, the financial director, will be saying, look, cut it to the core. We want to maximize our profits. We can only do that by reducing our outgoings. But there's only so far you can go with that. So that's staying focused and having the barriers that John said about your mission statement and your messaging and your values and everything. This also, as part of your branding, and it is part of branding, is knowing where you're going to position yourself as a business. Yeah. And making sure it's profitable is key. There's people I've worked with that have said, I pay all my staff and, one thing that, and I've turned around on one particular person, I turned around, had a meeting with a one-on-one session, And I said, when was the last time you took a holiday? I went, oh, I don't think I've had a holiday in 7 years. Right, you haven't got yourself a business. You are not a business owner. You are a slave. You're going to burn yourself out. And do you know what? If you aren't already getting seriously ill, you are going to become it. And it went very quiet for about 30 seconds. I didn't say anything, which is unlike me, but I didn't. And this chap raised his head up from his glass of orange juice that he was drinking at the time. You remember what we were drinking? Looked up at me and went, Steve, I'm actually already at the doctor's and I'm on medication because I aren't well. And I says, and that is because you haven't given yourself a rest. It's okay. And it's very commendable, you know, and to actually help other people and make sure staff are paid, which is important as well. But if you aren't looking after yourself, then you're not going to have a business. So the branding, it doesn't make any difference. You're not going to be there. So making sure all these elements that we are talking about in today's episode, they all have a relevant amount of importance as each other in their own rights, but you need to be clear about each one. So it might seem a bit of a behemoth of a task to do on this particular episode with regards to branding, because we are covering quite a few different elements, as we've talked before about elements to make a full, you know, process and strategy work. But you need to be understanding that one element of your branding isn't going to cut it for the whole branding of your business. You need to look at each one on a granular level and make sure you address them and you are very thorough. And we've said this on lots of other topics. You have to give it the time that it needs, but it doesn't need to take forever, because we know if you are, you know, an army of one, as John said earlier on, but you outsource lots of things to people, you're potentially going to be limited with time. And this is something I do on my course, where I show people how to do automation. And I did a reel the other day about, you know, when's it time to get maybe a virtual assistant in and things. There are ways to help, but, you know, offload the burden of the workload, but still taking your business in a positive direction. So with that said, the barriers to stay focused is important, because if you don't stay focused, then you're going to water down your efforts. Because like John says, why didn't they take the bags out to the car from the supermarket? Well, that's then taking them away from serving another customer or making sure a shelf is stocked for the next buyer to come in, and they go, oh, well, that shelf's empty. I was going to buy some of them. I'll go to another shop. They've just lost a sale, which means they're making less money, which means, I know it's taking it slightly out of context, but it means that they're losing out on business, and it could have an effect on, you know, the success of the business if that was to happen over and over and over again, because then they would get a reputation. That brand would get a reputation of, yeah, they've got a lot of things in that shop, but there's some things which the shelves are always empty and I'd like that, so I get it from somewhere else.
You always have to wait because there's never anybody on the tills.
This is it. So, you know, but that ties into your brand and what people will talk about. And I'll guarantee you, if they have a bad experience, they'll scream and shout and they'll tell the world. If they have a good experience, you're less likely to hear about it. And we all know that's the case. So you need to make sure that you don't water down your efforts. Otherwise it becomes, you know, the outcomes are weaker. So when you're looking at your branding, and something John hasn't mentioned yet, and I'd like to add this in, and I'm conscious where we are with time, John, that we're probably about 5-10 minutes away from there, or there about 30 minutes, is John's talked about obviously a lot of the structure behind the branding with regards to your mission statement and the values and how that links with your client avatar that we spoke about before. I just want to touch briefly on the visual presence of your branding, because that's not as important as you may think. I know what John mentioned about the branding for behind the business with the window and the colours, the orange and grey, and the arrow going in, you know, that kind of creates a bit of intrigue for someone that's not seen that branding before. They're going, what's this? What's going on? What's the arrow for? You know, and that makes people look and want to find out more, as opposed to just going, it's an arrow going through a window, it's a window company. They don't know that, and it's being done exactly for that reason. And we did quite a few different versions of it, didn't we, John, before we actually decided on this one?
We did. Yeah, we absolutely did. We had 2 or 3 which were abominable.
But this is it, you see. When I'm just talking on this point about the visual for branding, is it doesn't have to be perfection from the get-go. I've worked with multiple companies where the branding, when we've been running for like 4 or 5 years, and we've looked back at the first attempt at like the logo, for example, it's like, wow, did we really put that out there? It's like, well, yes, we did, because at the time it was something just to get you started.
That's right.
But this is where John's part is very important, that the actual wording, the driving force behind that brand, what it all stands for. That is the key. That is the power. It's not, I mean, Coca-Cola, yes, they have predominantly had the same logo, but it's changed. Slight differences, slight changes have happened over the years. Pepsi, one of the biggest competitors from them. Again, there has been slight changes to the actual look of the branding, believe it or not. You go back 50 years
totally different.
And you look at them, and now look at them today. They're subtle, but they're in keeping with the time. So don't get too hung up with, oh, my logo, my company logo has to look this way.
You're absolutely right, Steve. And I think that the thing that
Steve, sorry to interrupt, John, but people will waste time trying to get perfection straight away. There'll be graphic designers possibly watching this thinking, well, I can do it first time. I'm sure you're very good at what you're doing, and I am not slating you at all. You know, graphics designers, I've got quite a few graphic designer friends. Hopefully still got them. And that is what I'm saying is, for the business owner, not the people delivering the service, but the business owner. And it's good for the graphic designers, actually, because the business owner will say, this is what I want, and they'll give them the brief. The graphic designer will do their expert, best at what they do, and present multiple options, different tones, textures, shades, colors, variations, and then one will be decided on. But then over time, and it could be months, it could be a couple of years, they'll go, we need to freshen something up here. One of my other counterparts to what I kind of do, where he's a business strategic coach, he's literally just rebranded all his website, and he's gone for a sharper look as opposed to a smoother look. So don't get hung up with having that perfect looking logo. I've changed mine. John mentioned it, for the client direction. That's changed over the last 2-3 weeks. I've had a brand new logo done, and I like it. It looks fresher. It kind of fits more with my brand and what my client avatar is. It's all about the direction, and it's a client, and it's all encompassing. And the colours as well were quite important. Completely different colours to what I had before. So, that's why I just wanted to add that in, John, because
that's great, Steve, because what Steve's talked about there, and I just want to pull at a thread there that's gone all the way through what Steve's just been talking about. But Steve's absolutely right when he says, it's not the logo itself is not that important, what it looks like. What's important is A, that it resonates with you, but B, that it encompasses, from a client perspective, it encompasses those values in your value statement. That's the idea. That's why he was talking about our logo, and we said, there was 2 or 3, and we did use a graphic designer that Steve recommended. But what we gave them was a brief. And if you've got that value set, and this goes back to a couple of weeks ago, Steve mentioned that we talked about his client avatar and the client avatar for behind the business, and we've gone quite deep. And one of the reasons that we'd done that was so that we could get that list of 5 or 6 values that were important to what we were doing, so that we could include that in the brief to the designer and say, look, this is an idea of what we've got, but whatever you come up with, it needs to encompass these values. Do something with these values in an image form. And he came up with 5 or 6 designs, and we picked that one and refined it, and went backwards and forwards. But what that means is that you can update your actual visuals over time. I'm in the middle of redesigning my website. I'm going to amalgamate both websites into one, and I've also reduced my service menu, if you like, to become much more laser focused on a certain type of coaching. But what that means is that some of my visuals have changed. My logo has changed, but it still encompasses those values, because that mission and that value has remained the same. And that's the important thing. When you're putting those things together, they have to be consistent, and you have to be happy with them, because they're the things that are going to drive decisions like, what is my logo going to look like? Do I need to change it? Do I want to get involved with working with a certain kind of company or a certain kind of advertising, or is that going to be, contrary to something that's in my value list? And if you really want to do something, is your value list correct? I just wanted to pull that out, Steve, because it's really foundational to what you were just saying. And I think, what you were saying was absolutely spot on. I think that's really
So, just to obviously wrap things up for today, then I appreciate you adding that little bit more, John, as always. That's why, John and I have decided to do these podcasts, because of the, not necessarily difference of opinion, but different viewpoints of similar tasks and parts of the journey business owners go on works really well. So, John sees it from a life coach perspective. I see it from a business strategist viewpoint. So it works really well. And we're trying to give you as much value that you can then apply to your business as we possibly can throughout all these podcasts, and we'll continue to do so, for as long as we're running. But that branding exercise, there is obviously homework that John mentioned to you, and I'll ask John just to recap that in a moment. But it's just to encompass what we've talked about, which is your branding isn't just about a logo. It goes a lot deeper than that. But it doesn't mean to say it's difficult to do. It's not time consuming to do. If you were to block out part of your week for a few hours and do a section, an element of it, and then do the next element, I'm going to use a phrase which I've just thought of myself. It's probably, not the most topical way of wording something, given the fact when we record this, we've just finished the Euros, but Rome wasn't built in a day. Anybody that watches football will understand exactly why that probably was a little bit of a nerve touch for some people. Not intentional. But it's all about other aspects. Yes, the visual is one thing, but it's what's behind the brand. What does the brand stand for? What does it mean? What is it going to deliver? What is it about for the company, for the business owner? And what is it about the people that may work, whether it's subcontract or employed, for the business owner? And also, what is it going to do for the customer, the end consumer, whether it's service or product based? It makes no difference. If it's offline or online, it makes no difference. But if you have those elements and you understand them and you've done the work that I'm going to get John to just go through what the homework is, then it's going to help you. So, John, do you want to just recap that before we wrap today's episode up?
Yeah, sure. So your homework this week is really to think about your company mission statement and value statement. So your mission statement, I gave you an example of that earlier on. It can be one line, it can be 2 lines, it can be a paragraph, but it needs to be as succinct as possible, because if you are asked by your client or by anybody else, what does your company do? Your mission statement forms part of that. But more importantly, it's something that your mind can grab hold of and say, right, this is what I'm aiming for. And then underneath that, your value statement. I want you to put together between 6 and 10 one-line points of this is what we stand for. These are the rules that we're going to operate under, basically. And those can be as daft as we're going to have fun. We're going to provide a fun client experience. That can be one of your values. Fun should be, I would suggest, in everybody's value statement, because what's the point in doing it? Life's too short. If you're not having fun, and if your client's not having fun, why do it? So between 6 and 10 points of values, and they should relate to the way you're going to operate your business in order to fulfill that mission. And I've just given you a key clue there, in that part of what you're doing is thinking about your client experience and the experience that you're going to present for them, but also the experience that you're providing for yourself in operating this business. Do those 2 things, and then look at the advertising you've already done. If you've done some advertising, look at if you've got a logo or anything like that. Start looking at that and saying, does this, what I've got already, meet these values? Does it work towards this mission statement? If it doesn't, you need to start thinking about changing your visuals. But really take more time over your values and your mission than you do over your visuals, and you're on the right path, I would suggest.
Yeah, absolutely, because the visual may well just become more apparent once you've done the bits that John's just said. So, and if you've done your advertising, it's not worked right, and you're scratching your head, then reach out to either myself or John. It could be that your thought process behind it is getting a bit confused and a bit cluttered, and John can help with the decluttering of the workload up here, which gives you more clarity. And if it's more a case of, no, I'm getting free time and I'm feeling the buzz, but it's just not clicking and I'm not getting something right, then feel free to reach out to myself, and it may be something which I can help with. But other than that, get to work, get your homework done. Hope you've enjoyed this episode. episode. It's been, hopefully a content-packed one, but it's only going to work and help drive your business forward and move the needle if you do something with it. So we always ask you to take action. And don't forget that we are on YouTube. So click the bell so you get notified when John uploads the next video, because he's the guy that does all this for us. And I'm, very grateful of his time for doing it to help get these messages out there. And also we're on various podcast providers, iTunes, Apple Play, and the like. So give us a like, give us a follow, leave us some comments. We'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. And the ways to get in touch with us are also on the website, which is behindthebusiness.uk. Feel free to hit us up there, and we'll look forward to seeing you for a very special episode 21. Watch out for it. Until then, have a great day.
Take care. Hi, this is John, reminding you before you go that if you liked what you saw or heard today, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel or visit our website at www.behindthebusiness.uk. That's where you'll find all of the previous episodes. If you prefer to listen in, you can find us on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Podbean, or your favourite podcast app. If you've got any questions or feedback about today's episode, you can contact me or Stephen using the details in the episode summary that accompanies this recording.